All right, folks, let's get this show on the road. If I don't think there's anybody watching, if anybody is watching, please do let me know if you can hear me. I am, as I mentioned in the description, in a hotel room. I'm in the middle of a work trip, and I figured I might as well do a quick live cast talk about things that don't require my props and cameras and stuff like that. So once again, if you're watching this live, please post in a comment. Tell me that you can hear me okay. I'm using this headset, which I don't think I've ever used for a live cast before. Just making sure you can hear me. The affirmative can hear. Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. I know I sound like a broken record, but I've had so many audio problems over the time I've been doing this that I always like to check. Very good. Facebook, YouTube, both can hear me. Thank you all for being here. I do appreciate it. The topic of the conversation today is going to be different reticle elimination technologies, why it matters, what kinds of scopes and what kinds of applications they work best in. My original plan was to really nerdy this up and use the OneNote as a whiteboard and cast that on the screen and do my clumsy illustrations using this Surface Pen. I have a Microsoft Surface computer. I even tested it yesterday. It all worked great. And I just now tested it. The pen's dead. Probably the battery is dead. In Microsoft's infinite wisdom, they are using a quad A battery, which I don't really have in this hotel and don't have time to go look for. It's still going to be nerdy, but just not as nerdy as I wanted it to be. If you really want me to nerdy things up in the future, I'm more than willing to revisit this and do so. Okay, without further ado, let's get moving. For the record, so if you ever wanted to know about reticle elimination technologies, you can thank this gentleman for asking me the question and giving me the idea that I should do a video on it. I wrote an article on it for Guns and Ammo. It was in the one of the precision rifle shooter issues. I believe I'll put up a link in the video description if you want a printed Word version of this. It was out last year, should still be available here and there. If you do order it online, keep in mind that the online newsstand, always that Outdoor Sports Group uses, they take their sweet time in terms of shipping magazines out, to put it mildly. Okay. All right. Now that we've discovered that I am limited to using, finger pointing and using illustrations with my hands, let's talk. Let's talk about reticle elimination technologies. Fundamentally, there are four primary types, and really only three are commonly used. Oh, by the way, so the speech I have is not really a pre-prepared speech. So if as questions come up, I will be addressing them as I go along, and then going back to the original topic. And Jared is here with a question. What's more important to you, battery life or ease in replacement? So for all rifle scopes and stuff, the battery is pretty easy to replace. So I've never made a purchasing decision on any sporting optic that had anything to do with ease of replacement. So I think that answers your question. Battery life is important, but for all rifle scopes, basically not reflex sights, battery life is fairly abysmal. Okay. So reticle elimination technologies. The three most common ones are called Etch and Fill, and that's the one that's used in most common high magnification scopes. There is fiber optic elimination, and there is the diffractive grating elimination. The whole drive to really dig into reticle elimination primarily is a product of the fact that we have these low-powered variable scopes used on AR-15s, and we started thinking about having a bright elimination. And since these are used in combat, we also started thinking about not having any forward signature. And that is really what brought this whole illumination business to the forefront. Up until then, it really wasn't that big a deal. Right? I've got a question. If nothing else changes, a better LED or emitter will increase the brightness, right? So better LED or emitter is a very vague statement. There are many things that can make it better, right? A brighter, all else being equal, a brighter LED or a brighter light source will make the reticle brighter, but it may have other undesired effects, which I'm going to cover momentarily. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. So the original and the most common way of illuminating a reticle is something called etch and fill. It's more these days more typically used on glass etched reticle. What that means is that there is this glass reticle cell. They etch a pattern on it, or whatever, the duplex reticle or a true reticle, some sort of something. And some of the reticle features are coated in a material that is reflective. Since there is no real light coming at it from the side of your face, unless the LED is on, when the illuminator is off, it just looks like a dark reticle. And when the illuminator is on, a part of it looks like something is reflecting. The way the illuminator works, it's sitting a little bit off to the side somewhere, right? So if the scope tube is like this, the illuminator cannot be shining it straight on because your eye is there. So it's a little bit off to the side, pointing at the reticle, reflecting light off of it. And there it's fairly simple. If you want the illumination to be brighter, you need a brighter emitter. You do need a fairly significant amount of dynamic range in this thing. What I mean by dynamic range is the reticle illumination has to be appropriate for the environmental conditions. Okay. The way the environmental conditions work is it can be bright, it can be dark. If your illumination is very low on a bright day, obviously you won't see it. It doesn't do anything, just sitting there burning down the reticle. If it is too bright at night, you're destroying your night adaptation and not really seeing anything again. And you'll also have all sorts of ghost images and things like that. In LED brightness question again, how does it work? PWM, the diode. Possibly. I really don't know how they do the power supply. I haven't really paid attention to it. Based on some of the images I've taken through the rifle scope, when I do the video with most reticles, not all, the dot does not look like it's blinking. If there was some sort of a comparatively slow power modulation, right, your eye would not see it, but the camera, when you take a video, would see it because it would have some sort of beating frequency with the video frame rate. So I suspect that it is some sort of a DC power supply, which sort of makes sense given that the batteries that they used are DC power supplies. I have seen for diffractive radicals, I've seen some interesting effects which suggest that there is some sort of modulation frequency to the way they drive the LED. But honestly, I haven't really looked at it a whole lot. I've looked a little bit at how powerful of an LED different companies use. And some get quite powerful. For example, the one is in SIG Tango 6T. That's the scope that the US military has selected for a couple of different things here and there. I got done testing it not long ago, and I have a picture of the reticle somewhere here. Let me find it. I'll show you. And is this it? No, I think this one. So this is the DWR reticle in the SIG Tango 6T, and you can see there is a illuminated horseshoe. It is just a simple etch and fill illuminated reticle, but it is surprisingly visible even on a fairly bright day. And it is the reason why it is visible is two things. One is that they're using a pretty bright LED, probably one of the brighter ones I've seen, but also the horseshoe is reasonably thick. And because the horseshoe is reasonably thick, it provides a fairly large surface area for the LED light to be reflected off of. So the combination of a large reflective area and a bright light source gives you a somewhat day-visible reticle. But one of the things with designs like this to keep in mind is that the LED spits out light in a fairly broad angle, and only some of it is incident on the reticle, meaning incident on the features of the reticle that reflect light. The rest of the light output of an LED goes all over the tube. Some of it gets absorbed somewhere in there, but a good amount of it will make it out of the front of the rifle scope. I've seen some Chinese rifle scopes that have supposedly bright front focal plane reticles. They have really bright, must have really bright LEDs, because when you look at these scopes, more light makes it out of the front of the scope than out of the back of the scope. Right? I mean, I keep on joking that what was the scope I looked at? I didn't like that scope. It was I've seen nothing good from that company. Atibal. Their 1 to 10 scope that I played with, that was a front focal plane. Aside from the fact the reticle was kind of weird and I didn't like the scope overall, we didn't track it. It did hold 0, so that was a good thing. It was probably, when you turn the illumination on, it made for a very serviceable flashlight, right? So they're kind of trying to brute force the idea without getting a little bit more clever. More power to them. Yeah, that was not a very good solution. SIG somehow managed to, I'm not sure if they use a collimatic lens on LED or something. There wasn't as much front signature, forward light signature. It was still a good bit, but it was a lot more controlled. Generally a better scope. It seemed like they were damping it much better. But anyhow, so this is most rifle scopes, especially precision rifle scopes, have this kind of a reticle illumination. It has a lot of interesting advantages because the illuminator essentially shines light on the entirety of the reticle, so you can choose what you want to reflect that light, right? You can have the whole thing illuminated, or just the center portion, or select a few different pieces. For example, quite a few Dwr reticles don't illuminate the whole thing, right? They illuminate some subset of the features so that it looks like a much smaller holdover reticle in low light, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, we've got a question. How does the primary arms 2x prism get 20,000 hours of battery life? That red coating is one reason why red dots have such long battery life. 2x prism is a fairly clear lens. So, yeah, the red coating is the reason why you have a fair amount of light with red dot sights, and so you don't need as crazy of an LED power. I have no idea what they're doing. Chances are it is for some sort of a fairly low power level, and for quote unquote typical use, where I think they have the shake awake thing and all that sort of stuff. I don't know how exactly they calculate it. I have one. Illumination works quite nicely, but the nice thing about the 2x prism is that I don't have to run the illumination all that much. It doesn't depend on the illumination that much, and if you run it bright, it dies much faster than that. So I haven't really dug into that claim, but to me it sounds kind of like marketing. Okay, there we go. Shake awake tech is a false marketing, claiming 20,000 hours battery life on a 2x prism. That I haven't really dug into it, so I don't know for sure. That would be my guess. You cannot have that red reflective coating in a rifle scope. It just doesn't work that way. It would only work in a collimating reflex sight. So to me, it looked like perfectly conventional reticle illumination and perfectly conventional battery. I don't think, and it's reasonably bright, so I don't think we're going to have any miracles with. I don't think we're going to have any miracles in terms of reticle illumination. Mr. Brian Finney is here. Good to see you, sir. Hello from Michigan. Well, I guess I should say hello from Massachusetts. I'm in the Boston suburb right now in my hotel room. What was I? Oh yeah. So that's the basic etch and fill reticle. And with the basic idea is that if a little bit of forward light signature is not a problem, and if you don't need this thing to be super bright, it's a really nice, easy to implement and inexpensive to implement way to illuminate a reticle. So it's not a bad way to go at all. There is a reason why it is so commonly used. And until we really started digging into low power variable scopes, the whole business of a day bright reticle did not come up as much. However, when we started using reflex sights, which have bright reticles, people looked at it and thought, oh, we could probably do it in a low power variable scope. The first one was the Schmidt short dot. About 20 years ago, some special operations guys figured out that on low power, you could use it practically like a red dot while still having available magnification, and the rest is sort of history. There has been a ton of development on that. That's an interesting question. In what circumstance would you pick a green reticle versus red reticle? Honestly, for the most part, it's personal preference, but there is something to be said about the environment you're in. For example, if you are in an environment with a lot of green backgrounds, a red reticle might stand out better, right? If you're in an environment with a lot of reddish, brownish, yellowish tones, deserty, etc., green might stand out better. For general purpose use, I still tend to prefer red. I think it works well in the majority of backgrounds. I live up in the desert, so we have some reddish stuff, but mostly it's green, brown, beige, yellowish, that kind of stuff. So I primarily use red. I have a few scopes with green illumination. It seems to work fine too. It's probably 90% personal preference. Okay. Are there any advantages between the two? Not too much, honestly. Some people prefer green, and they say if they have astigmatism, it plays a little bit better with their astigmatism. In principle, green is the color our eyes are most sensitive to. So it's something we really see. But once again, if you live in a forested area, like I'm back east right now, out here it's all forests, and I would imagine red would probably work a little better here. But for competition, since your eyes pick out green really, really well, a lot of people like it. Okay. Shan, brute force, do you mean just using bright or light source? Exactly. Right. If all you're doing is just turning up the brightness and getting an ever brighter LED, well, you'll drain the battery a little faster, unless it's more efficient. But by and large, you are just trying to make a day bright reticle using brute force methods. And the brighter you make the LED, the more light also gets out up front. So just something to keep in mind. Mr. Drew Bradley here, just now got the notice. I hope all is exceptionally well and healthy and learning some clever stuff each day. Sure, we'll go with that. All right. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So I sort of finished initial discussion of the etch and fill reticle, and what I'm getting to now is a fiber illuminated reticle. Probably the most famous modern example of that was the Razor Gen 2 126. That has a bright fiber dot, the scope that I keep on recommending called Delta Striker 126 by 24. Also a nice bright fiber dot. And there are quite a few others. Trigical has been using fiber optic elimination for quite a long time. It has a couple of interesting advantages and disadvantages. So the way a fiber reticle works, we only really see it, with very, very few exceptions, we only really see it in second focal plane reticles. And the reticle cell itself cannot be glass etched. Basically, these are wire reticles. And the reason why these have to be wire reticles is that there is a conventional wire reticle crosshair or some mil hashes, stuff like that. And then you have to have a fiber hiding behind one of the legs of that reticle. So if you have this crosshair reticle, behind one of them, you will have a fiber. essentially glued to it. And this thing have so little mass that typically they stay glued. Once in a while, where if one of them delaminates, you will see a fiber kind of fall off, and you'll see there's something else in there. But by and large, so there is a fiber, and the facet of the fiber is cut at 45 degrees and polished, and it becomes a mirror. So the light comes up, gets reflected off the mirror, and goes toward your eye, creating nice, bright fiber optic dot. Okay. The way it looks, I should have an image here somewhere. Let me make sure I have one open, and I'll pop it on the screen. I think I had a couple of examples. So there we go. There's one. So this is a snapshot through the Delta Striker 126. I think this is on 1 power. And this is a good example of what a fiber illuminated dot looks like, and you've all seen these. These are usually simple-ish reticles, simply because since it's not glass etched, I cannot really have, I can have a fiber dot, I can have some hash marks. I cannot have any sort of a tree reticle or anything like that. I cannot have anything that is that provides wind holes. But the dot can be very, very bright. And because it comes up in a fiber and gets reflected from the tip of the fiber toward the eyepiece of the scope, there is minimal, if any, forward signature. I mean, there some reflections make it out, but there isn't much. And it is in many ways a comparatively efficient way of doing this. You still use a conventional LED that's coupled to the other end of the fiber somewhere in there, but the light of the LED is not spread all over the place. It's really concentrated into this small center dot, and it really stands out. Originally, when we were talking about nuclear bright dot, if you've ever heard the expression, it started out with all these fiber optic illuminated reticles, and yeah, that can give you nice bright dot, and that's pretty close. On most modern designs, that's probably as close as we ever got to a true red dot experience. Okay, Drew. I have never used the Burris XTR2 illumination yet, other than turning it on to see it. Never used it in the field, no need for me. Yeah, under most the daylight conditions, there is really no compelling reason to mess with the illumination, but I've seen enough situations where it was helpful. So I like to have it in the scope once we get past a certain price range. Mr. JB is here. Hello, guys. Good to see you, sir. Charles, good to see you, my friend. Haven't seen you in a while. I hope, Charles, I hope you're coming to SHOT Show. I'm definitely going to be there. Hopefully we can cross paths when you're there. One of my tests is to get into a dark room, set it to its lowest power, and cover the front lens. I should barely be able to see the lead portion of the reticle. If I see any glow emitting from the scope, it's almost always too bright for true low light hunting. More than a small dot is not good. Yeah, I'm with you. For conventional rifle scopes, for low light use, the reticle illumination has to be extremely faint. Anything else will mess with your eyes' night adaptation. Okay. JB, Burris XTR2 SFP illumination is fantastic. I haven't seen the FFP. So Burris uses a conventional etch and fill illumination in their second focal plane XTR2s, but they use a fairly bright emitter, so it is indeed quite bright. Okay. What does the Vortex Strike Eagle 5-25 use? Etched reticle? Yes, that's a conventional etch and fill reticle. What's the battery life on the Striker 1-6? Not a clue. It should be very similar to Razor Gen 2 and all the rest of these. I've never really measured it, but it's on full brightness, it stands sometimes hundreds of hours, but it's not anything ridiculous. Okay. Drew, JB, mine is very dim. Okay, so yeah, Drew bought the Striker. If your Drew, yours is very dim, either something's wrong with the scope or you need a new or you need a new battery, because I've seen several and they generally are quite bright. Chen, does a kill flash help with the light going out of the objective lens? Somewhat, right? So I mean, it blocks some of the areas, it will block some of the light of going out. The rest of it does make it out. What the kill flash does in many ways is that you have to be right in front of the scope to be able to see light coming out. If you're a bit off to the side, it makes it much harder to see, just like the same way as it kills reflections. Okay. So Drew, you're talking about which? You're talking about the XTR2 1 to 8? If that is the case, illumination, that one's not super bright, but it's reasonably bright. If it's barely visible, you do need a new battery. Okay. I have issues with the Chevron reticle versus a dot, particularly illuminated with the PA2X. No matter how I set the focus, it's hard to see the chevron clearly. Am I doing something wrong, or is it my eyes? I honestly don't know. So, Roman, if you are doing this, is the chevron blurry only when illuminated, or also when it's not illuminated? It will make a difference. Please tell me a little bit more of what you're seeing. Jimmy Drew, gotcha. Okay. Mr. Quantified Performance just joined. We'll have to catch it in full later. Thanks for doing this. Anytime. So just to catch you up, I kind of went over the Etch and Fill reticle illumination and fiber optic. Once I get through the questions, next thing I'm going to cover and show you some illustrations of how the diffractive reticle works. And that's arguably the most interesting of the technologies, since that's what enabled bright front focal plane reticles, but also the most expensive one. And we'll talk a little bit about that momentarily. Okay. JP also have the Horus 951 reticle tree. Yeah, on that one, it should not be very bright at all. That's an interesting comment. I just wish Schmidt and Bander would do an elimination delete option again. Not sure what that means. You're talking about getting PM2s without elimination so that they don't have that tumor on a tube? I'm guessing that's what you mean. Roman, both illuminated and not. So that's interesting. You're not able to see the chevron clearly for any eyepiece setting, whether illuminated or not. It could be your eyes, but it could be something that's just wrong with the scope. The easiest thing is to have somebody else look at it and see if they can adjust it to their eye so that the chevron is nice and sharp. If other people cannot adjust it also, then it's possible that your scope needs work. And then just send it to PA, and I'm sure they'll take care of it. It is also possible that it is your eyes. But on the other hand, if you have other rifle scopes that you can adjust to to make them look sharp, I don't know. It may be worthwhile to try a couple other scopes and see. Okay. Drew. Okay, so high magnification scope with the Horus reticle. Yes, these typically don't have brightly illuminated reticles, and for a reason. For this kind of stuff, the illumination is really mostly there for low light use. Joe's here. Good to see you, sir. Mr. Cyclops Joe. Awesome. All right. I think I got through the current batch of questions. So I talked a little bit about etch and fill illumination. I talked a little bit about fiber optic illumination. Before I move on to the next one. So the big thing with the fiber optic illumination, as I mentioned, it does give you a very bright dot, which I like. But there is a physical fiber in the focal plane of the rifle scope. And it can only go down to a certain size. And the way rifle scope reticles work, the physical size of the reticle in the front focal plane is a lot smaller. So in practical terms, you cannot really put a fiber optic illuminated reticle in the front focal plane of the scope. So all of the scopes that we like that use this technology are in this do have second focal plane reticles. because the physical thickness of the fiber basically precludes front focal plane use. But if you do not need a particularly complicated reticle, and if you are okay with just a bright illuminated dot, fiber illuminated reticle is really your most cost-effective way to make a truly day bright dot. Okay. Drew is talking about blurs. Yeah, so it's you have astigmatism, buddy. Okay, and Roman, I do have more than one PA2X, same thing. I also have many older PA and prism optics with dot reticles. For some reason, the Chevron is just difficult for my eyes. It's possible. So I use the Chevron. It does not give me any problems, but it is possible it just doesn't work for your eyes. There are eye irregularities that are subtle and show up differently. And on top of it, it really depends on how your brain processes the image. It's possible that something in the Chevron just doesn't agree with you. Okay. All right. What was yeah? So that kind of wraps up the general discussion of the fiber optic illuminated reticle. And let's talk about diffractive reticle. So to date, I think only one company makes diffractive reticles. It's a Swiss company called IMT. And what it is it is a glass etched reticle, but it's not a conventional etch and fill. When you think of a conventional glass etched reticle, some sort of a pattern, tree, crosshair, something is basically etched in a glass plane and then filled with some sort of either dark or reflective material. When you talk about diffractive reticles, they do the etching a little bit differently, and they make very, very small. They make very, very small features. And in optics, there is this phenomenon called diffraction, what basically happens if you have a glass plane, and if you etch it with several repeating lines, you just need a few, some significant but not a very large number. And when the light hits this repeating pattern called a diffraction grating, it will be routed in a very particular way. Some of it will get through, and then there's going to be first, second, etc. modes of diffraction that are deflected by a particular predetermined angle. And what determines the angle is the periodicity of these grating lines, how far apart they are, and the wavelength of light. And I have an illustration of what this looks like here. And let me make this image a little bit larger. And I will put this on a screen. It will kind of give you an idea in a very generic way of how a diffraction grating works. Why am I not seeing this? Okay. There we go. Let me share this on the screen. And you guys will be able to see it. Okay. Thank you for the donations, guys. I do appreciate it. Where was I? There we go. So here's a sort of a generic demonstration of how a general purpose diffraction grating works, right? If there is light, I'm assuming you guys can you guys see the mouse moving on the screen? So when I move the mouse on the screen, could you see it? Somebody mentioned if you can see it, because otherwise I'm looking like an idiot here, moving the mouse around. The light comes in from here. It's a particular wavelength. Wavelength essentially just means color. Most of what I've seen from MT is red, but there is no compelling reason. It can be any color, but there is a relationship between the wavelength of the light and the periodicity of these grating lines. And what happens is that there are different orders of reflection. Zeroth is light ray that's going straight through, and then it's first and second order. And this angle is purely a function of the wavelength and grating periodicity. What it means is a couple of things. Other than making weird-ass stick diagrams, what it means is that the way the energy of the light is distributed, by changing some of the angles of how the light's coming in and being very specific in how the grating is deposited, we can get all of this incoming energy to go in just a few or just one particular way. And if you look at this, all this empty space between the diffracted rays, no energy is going there. So it ends up being a pretty efficient way to route light energy. And the way it works in a specific diffracting grating reticle, there are a couple different ones. There we go. Let me make sure you guys are able to see. Okay, you are able to see the image. This is good. And the way it works in a particular reticle, so if this is a reticle cell, we can deposit a grating here, shine light at it from a particular angle, and get nearly all, or vast majority of the light going back along the optical axis of the scope in a general direction of your eye. If this was not a grating, if there was a regular reflective surface, that would just reflect all over the place, scatter around, and do all sorts of funky things. With a diffracted reticle, by depositing this diffractive grating, you can get most of the energy go in the direction you need it to go. Okay, I hope this is making some sort of sense. Okay, I hope this makes sense. If it doesn't, please tell me. But basically, that's essentially what this is. The downside is that creating a reticle using these gratings is fairly complicated. You need a lot more specialized equipment that most reticle makers use. And but the results are fairly interesting. Basically, you have an added measure of directionality of light. There is also more than one type of grating. There are amplitude gratings and there are phase gratings that are deposited and created a little bit differently. And the way they work, you can write a grating in a reticle and set it up so that it's only really visible when it's illuminated. When it's not illuminated, it makes for these very, very faint gray lines, and unless you're really looking for them, you will not see them. Okay? That is really the big advantage of diffracted grating reticle. For low power variable riflescope, because these grating reticle lines are very thin, they are small enough where you can make a bright spot in a front focal plane reticle, and this new current layer of very bright low power variable front focal plane reticles, they all use this, the best I can tell, this diffractive technology, and that's scopes like Razor Gen 3, Night Force Attacker, etc. Okay. Right, let's look at a couple of questions. A couple of guys donated. Thank you, gentlemen. Do appreciate it. Mr. Lucas Allen, did you already go over your issues with the T3 reticle? No, I haven't yet. I'm just talking about reticle eliminations. I figured somebody's going to come up and ask why I dislike that thing so much, and now a little later I'll find a picture, put it up on the screen, and kind of go over some of the generic things that I dislike about it. Okay. So on that refracting area, does color matter there, or is it angled mirrors or silverized plated surface? So if you're talking about the diffractive reticle, it's not a refracting area, it's diffraction, DIFF. And it's not angled mirrors, and it's not silverized plated surface. It's not a reflection, it's a diffraction. It's a different optical phenomenon. And what really matters there, so if they're coated with something or not, it matters because it can be either amplitude or phase grating. And what really matters is the color of light, which is the wavelength, and the periodicity, the spacing between the lines and the line thicknesses. Okay, they can be coated or uncoated. The grating will still work. It will still reroute light. But if they are chromed, basically coated with something, when the light is off, you will see it as a normal etched reticle pattern, and a lot of them work in exactly that way. If they're not covered with chrome and etched a little bit differently, it becomes a phase grating, and that essentially disappears from view unless it is illuminated. A good example of that is a while back I did a video on a scope called Blazer 127, and it had this interesting thing. On high magnification, there was only a center illuminated dot. But on lower magnifications, they would also have a donut around the dot. That was a pornographic picture. They will also have a donut around the dot, and that donut would only be visible on low powers, right? And what they did, they put in a little switch in there, and you put in a little bit of a switch in there where on low powers the donut would be visible and on high powers not. That's a phase grating that essentially disappears from view unless it is illuminated. Okay. Let's see if I have an example of an a diffractive grating reticle here somewhere. Oh, there we go. It's not the best picture, but it'll work for now. So this is a Vortex Razor Gen 3, 1 to 10. Let me see what magnification this is on. This is on 3 power. And the reticle illumination, it was a bright sunny day. And the reticle illumination here in the center was so bright, it's actually saturated my camera when I was taking the picture. But you see this bright saturated dot here. It actually looks bright red with the naked eye. And this illuminated features, this is a diffraction grating. Okay. There is a little bit of a downside to this directionality. Like with most diffractive reticles, one of the things you notice is that as you start moving your eye, away from center, you will start seeing this thing blink out a little bit and go a little bit dimmer. That is a downside of this directionality. There is some tolerance there. Some are worse than others. Razor Gen 3 works pretty well. I like it. But in terms of off-axis tolerance, fiber optic illuminated reticles are less picky. But in practical use, for me, both seem to work quite nicely. Okay. Let me get back to my normal screen. There we go. Where was I? Yeah. So these are the 3 really most commonly used ones. Diffractive reticle is expensive. And the cheapest scope I know of currently that uses diffractive reticle technology is probably the Night Force NX8 1 to 8. It's about $1,800. Everything that is cheaper than that at the moment does not use it. I do know there's at least one scope coming out, should be somewhat less expensive, that uses a diffractive reticle, and I have high hopes for it. The scope that I use the most is, of course, the Vortex Razor Gen 3. It's probably my current favorite LPVO design, and I like it because it is a general purpose design. When I'm shooting at longer distances, I do prefer front focal plane reticles. But on 1x, if I want it to be truly day bright, then I need the diffractive reticle, and that's what Razor Gen 3 gets me. Is this whole day bright business a hard requirement? No, but it does make a difference for speed. For example, arguably my favorite front focal plane etch and fill scope right now is a size 6, 1 to 6 scope, and I should have a picture here somewhere. There we go. Hold on. So this is a snapshot through the size 6. I just took a snapshot from the video I made on this thing. And you can see that there is this center crosshair that is illuminated. It's reasonably bright. It's not super bright. They didn't try to make it nuclear. They gave it a little bit more area so it stands out, but also you see these little bullets pointing to the center. It gives this sort of horizontal X. That's their version of a high visibility feature. And it does aid speed. In the side-to-side test, this is not as fast for me as a Razor Gen 3 or as a Delta Striker 1 to 6 with a fiber optic reticle, or like I said, Razor Gen 3 with the diffractive reticle, but this is pretty fast. And I do get the advantages of a glass etched reticle where it's a tree type design, and this is notably cheaper than the Razor Gen 3 that uses a diffracted reticle. How much a diffractive reticle really adds to the cost of the scope is anybody's guess, right? I mean, I don't know how much IMT charges for it. So I've been friendly with some IMT folks and I've chatted with them a good bit. They're kind of proprietary. For example, they won't tell me exactly which scope uses the reticle. With some of them that I've tested, I mean, I can tell which technology it is, right? So I know Razor Gen 3 uses it. I know the Night Forces use it. I know the Schmidt-Bender PM2 uses the diffractive reticle, but it's in a second focal plane, interestingly, although they do have a good reason. Looking at some scopes that I know use diffractive reticle, the difference in user price of a scope can be $400 or $500 different, just because they have to buy the diffracted reticle from IMT and then mark it up and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Diffracting, does that mean the light is being controlled or directed? Or is it being scattered? Whatever that is allowed in and through. So diffractive is, I'm going to put it in a comment, it's going to go to both. So to search diffractive reticle, diffractive grating, and the effect is called diffraction, so that we get the spelling correct. So that should get it. Controlled and directed is a pretty, it's not quite how it works, but it's a pretty good analogy. This repeating pattern of lines called a diffraction grating is what has that same effect. Rather than light scattering all over the place, you are essentially rerouting the energy in the direction we want, and that direction is a function of grating periodicity and wavelength of light. Okay. That's a good question from Roman. Is there a practical durability concern between wire reticle versus etched? I've seen Vortex employees on forums say that modern wire reticles are highly durable compared to the past and not an issue. Vortex employees are correct. Even in the past, it wasn't really much of an issue. From everything that I've seen, it was mostly made up nonsense, but there have been some low quality wire reticles in the past. Modern wire reticles are quite robust, and honestly, they have been, when properly made, they've always been robust. And same deal with glass etched reticles. I've even heard some old timers claim that wire reticles are more durable, and on dangerous game rifles, they've seen glass etched reticles crack more or something. I have not seen any good data, but I know with well-made scopes, durability of both is not really an issue. Roman, this is in reference to the Delta Striker, which I've read is a wire reticle. Yes, it is a wire reticle. I have it on my primary rifle, and I can't find very much health information on this topic anywhere. Anything made by man can fail. From some of the modern day statistics I've seen, with well-made scopes, both wire reticles and glass etched reticles are equally durable. Yeah. And Drew, I'm not an authority upon this matter, but I have an old Leupold scope with wire reticle. It is every bit of 40 years old, still works. Yes, when well made, they work fine. Okay. What is the difficulties in manufacturing process using diffractive methods? Maybe I missed it. The lines are very thin and very small, so conventional equipment used to make etched reticles cannot make feature size that small. The equipment used is more like older style semiconductor equipment than traditional stuff used for glass etching. Drew, roger that. I have that correct spelling entered into the search engine to further get educated up on this aspect. Thank you. Yeah, just to look up diffractive effects. It's a really interesting part of optics, and it's a very non-intuitive one. The thing with optics in general is that optics is not that complicated. It gets very convoluted, but it's not really that complicated from a scientific standpoint. The reason why so many people struggle with the understanding of various optical phenomena is that they are not especially intuitive, if that makes sense. Our regular normal intuition that we use for the things around us is not hugely applicable to optics. Okay, I need to do something real quick. I'm going to mute for a moment. I'll be back momentarily. I'm working off of an assumption that none of you guys are particularly interested in listening me blowing my nose. In every hotel room, I have some sort of a mild allergic reaction to something or other, maybe the carpet, something. All right, where was I? So we talked about glass etch and fill reticles. We talked a little bit about fiber optic illuminated reticles. We sort of wrapped up with diffractive reticles. Let me glance and see if this document I have gives me any other useful illustrations. This one is actually not bad. I'm going to put this up on a screen just to kind of wrap up with this topic and then continue with a couple of other things. Why am I not seeing this? Okay, let's try this. So this is another illustration how a diffraction grating reticle works. You notice that the LED is shining at a fairly steep angle. If the scope tube is like this, right? Whatever light somehow is not controlled and diffracted by the grating toward your eye, if it does get through, and I'm sure someone gets through, it's almost orthogonal to the optical axis of the rifle scope. And it's fairly easy to capture and dampen. So one of the big advantages of this approach is that almost nothing, if anything at all, makes it out of the objective. From a standpoint of forward light signature, diffractive radicals really do an excellent job. Okay. These reticle types are kind of propagating a little bit more these days, and I'm pretty happy to see that. Hope there'll be enough volume where the prices go down some. In terms of implementation, I mean, they have their weaknesses. They're kind of hard to make. They cost some money. There's some directionality, which is not always a good thing. But on balance, you can do really nice, sophisticated patterns, and I think overall it adds to the functionality of the rifle scope. Philip joined us and says "Добрый день." I think that's what he's trying to say. Okay. JB is commenting, Roman, having a good question about wire reticle durability. Okay. Yeah, I think we've addressed that. Drew. Have been collecting all sorts of lenses and mirrors harvested out of all sorts of equipment over the past 30 years. I wanted to try my hand at making my own optical comparator, then seen them used for less than 500. Yeah. I've seen people who really like tinkering with this kind of stuff, and you do this if you want to tinker with stuff, right? You can usually buy a piece of used equipment for less than it's going to take you, especially given how much time it's going to take. Chen, is diffractive reticle used elsewhere other than for illumination? Look, so diffractive effects, diffraction gratings are used in optics all the time for monochromators and a variety of other different instrumentation. It's a very widely used optical effect, used all the time, happens all the time. This is just one particular implementation of diffractive gratings. Generally, they're used within scientific and engineering applications all the time. There's a million types of different gratings. My very first job after college in fiber optics involved something called fiber Bragg gratings. Same conceptually, same basic idea, except we used it for mode coupling in telecom. Gratings are all over the place. You've used them and they're all around you. You've just never really paid attention. This is one application of them. Let's see. The one other type of a reticle, and it's barely used, so I don't really talk about it too much, but the low power variable scope that kind of started this all, the original 1.1 to 4x20 Schmidt and Bender short dot. It had a bright dot. It did not use a diffractive reticle. It was 20 years ago. I don't think they did that too much back then. The short dot used something called the beam splitter to make this bright illuminated dot. And I unfortunately don't have a particularly good illustration of this thing. But fundamentally, what a beam splitter is, it's a optic of some sort where there is a surface. The surface is coated or uncoated with something, and you have some light that comes in, is reflected, and some of it gets through. And from here, something gets reflected, some of it gets through. You can take the surface and coat it with, let's say, the same coatings you used on reflex sites, so that it reflects red and transmits everything else. If you do that and you introduce in this beam splitter an optical light path, it's really expensive. The beam splitter has to be very high quality. Coatings have to match so that the whole thing doesn't have a color cast. It's doable, it's just hard to do. You can introduce a very brightly illuminated dot in the optical path using a beam splitter, and that's how the original short dot worked. Early prototypes of the scope that became Minox ZP8 also used the beam splitter. I don't know if the current scope still does or not. It's hard to say. Philip, is there a chance that we can see a comparison of disassembled scope internals? I don't know. There may be a chance, but probably not for me as a general courtesy. I don't really disassemble scopes that people send me. I don't think it's polite. And honestly, I mean, I can show you different internals. I don't know how illustrative it's going to be unless you really know what you're looking for. There isn't all that much to look at. Drew, how does the laser rangefinder inside of the certain scopes not have the laser get distorted by the scope's lens as the laser is on the inside? Good question. Honestly, I have not really paid a whole lot of attention to how it is integrated. That having been said, if I were doing this, I would position the laser in one of the focal planes of the scope and use the riflescopes optics to project it out. Keep in mind that the laser is at a different wavelength. It's at a near infrared wavelength, the wavelength that your eye does not see. So introducing a laser rangefinder going through the same optical path as the image in the scope, you have to change your coatings a bit so they transmit infrared light and all sorts of other stuff. But you can align it to the optical axis so that it uses the same objective as in this case to collimate the beam and spit it out. So it doesn't have to distort it. It can be designed so it doesn't. But as a general rule, when I think of a riflescope equipped with a laser rangefinder, I oftentimes tend to prefer an external laser rangefinder bore sighted to the scope, mounted to the side of the scope or something like that, because I think with dedicated optics, you can do a little bit more. But we have some very nice rifle scopes that have integrated laser rangefinders, Swarovski DS on the high end, versus laser scope in the mid range, and they do work quite well. And there is more development happening there. There are some newer versions coming that are looking very, very good. Burris and Archibald are the only ones that use brute force method for now, right? No, a ton of people do it. Every bright reticle that uses bright-ish front focal plane reticle that is fairly bright is essentially that. Tango 6T does it in a somewhat more clever way, but it is a very bright LED. Atibal, JRC, a ton of them. Burris scopes that were mentioned earlier are no longer made. Burris discontinued the XTR2, but Burris RT6 uses the same etch and fill illumination. It's a little bit easier to make it brighter when it's in a second focal plane. Let's see who else does this. Athlon, Kronos 126 does the same thing. There are quite a few others. It's not uncommon. I mean, I call it brute force and sounding derogatory. It's not derogatory, really. It can be done better. SIG sort of showed with the Tango 6T that it can be done pretty nicely. It's not as good, in my opinion, as higher-end diffractive radical stuff, but it's better than serviceable. It's a lot less expensive. But since brightly illuminated etch and fill reticles are easily the cheapest, there are more of these than on everything else, definitely. Okay. All right, let's see. Any other questions, guys? While you're thinking, earlier I had a question about why I don't like the Tremor 3 reticles, so I'm gonna find an image of it while you're thinking, and try see if I can illustrate a few points. I see a lot of images. I don't see the one I'm looking for. Give me one moment. That's not it. Chen, besides red and green, are there any other colors? I've seen amber illumination also. There are different shades of red. It can be really any color you want. As long if you can find an LED of that color, you can illuminate it. There were a couple of scopes that I've seen with blue illumination, I think. So it's, I mean, if there's an LED in that color, you can use it. Jacob, it's a bit off topic, but need your advice real quick. I'm trying to figure out what scope to put in a SCAR 20 for DMR type use, competitions, hunting, etc. In the lightweight mid magnification category, am I giving up anything appreciable going with the Razor LHT 4.5 to 22 versus Mark 5 3 to 18 or March 3 to 24? Optic would be used in tandem with offset RDS. You're not giving up much. March, a whole lot. March is a better optic, but March has a shallower depth of field for field use and hunting. Honestly, Razor LHT 4.5 to 22 would probably be my choice, unless you're willing to spend the money on a tangent laser. I would just go with that, and that's a scope that sits on my fix, which I kind of use for all this general purpose use. So take it for what it is, but Mark V is excellent, but you can't get an illuminated 3 reticle in a Mark V, which is something that I like, and the 3 to 18. So I would just stick with the Razor HDLHT and be done with it. I'm gonna go back to trying to find the. Okay, there's a good picture, I think. All right. There's one picture, and let me get a slightly more zoomed in picture. Okay. So, unless you guys have any other questions right now, I'm gonna very quick. I'm not gonna go over all of the details of the Tremor 3 reticle, but I'll just put it on the screen and tell you some of the specific things that I dislike about it. So let's first look at a slightly zoomed in portion of this reticle. And let's make sure you see my mouse. So this is the whole reticle. This is zoomed out, pardon me. There are a lot of things wrong with it. The one really important thing is that there's just too much stuff there. And my basic take on precision reticle, general reticle design, if there is a feature that you don't use, don't put it in there, right? When you're fresh and everything, it's all good. When you start getting a little bit tired, all this crap that your brain has to see and process and make sense of is just not a good thing. In practical terms, if somebody can explain to me, every 10 milliradian, I've got this horizontal line going across the whole thing. I would really like to know what possible purpose it serves other than distracting my attention. 10 milliradian line, 20 and 30, and it goes all the way to the edges. My basic question is, why the hell does it do? Then we get to the whole grid, which starts out kind of okay. 10, 20, 30, 40 milliradians of holdover. When's the last time you wanted to use 40 milliradian of holdover? And if you have ever tried it, you will run into all sorts of interesting issues with distortion, all sorts of other stuff. As a general rule, aiming with things so far away from the center of the reticle and expecting precision can be asking for trouble, because oftentimes you need to reset your parallax, readjust stuff, and still you're not aiming with the center, which when you're tired is asking for trouble. Basically, all this stuff in the bottom is, for the most part, not something you necessarily need. If you're planning to do ELR with reticle only, then I suppose, but you better then take your time and do this correctly, and you're not looking through the best possible image quality you can get, which you might need for target discrimination. Okay. If you generally look at this, there is another fundamental problem. The primary aiming point, the stuff that you'd be using within a somewhat closer distances, we need to aim quickly, is somewhere in here, but when you're on low magnification, it's not very well defined. And the most prominent visible area of this thing is actually below the primary aiming point. One of the key criteria for a good reticle design is to have the primary aiming point nicely defined, so that when you're tired or in a rush, your eye naturally goes to it. In this reticle, your eye naturally goes everywhere else except for the primary aiming point. Okay. I hope all of that makes sense. Okay, Manitou has a could be the bottom mill grid be more for milling out buildings, vehicles, etc., considering it was more of a military reticle? No, it's not. To mill out buildings, vehicles, etc., you don't need a grid. You need a scale. Horizontal line, vertical line. You can keep those. This whole grid business is for aiming, and it's all it does is it obscures things. Let's. I have another picture that I pulled up that kind of zooms in a little bit onto the center, top, 16, 17 milliradian. Let's share that screen. Where is that? Yeah, this is it. All right. So this is a same reticle zoomed in a little bit. So we're looking at the top. So there are several interesting things happening here. Generally, it's a milliradian reticle. Down here, up here, there is milliradian and all these weird-ass wind dots that you have to make sure work with your ballistics caliber and all that sort of stuff. There's a million of them. They're all different colors, and basically it looks like a mosquito net. One of the really important things for a rifle scope, when you're shooting alone especially, but then is to try to be able to see the impact if you missed, and if you never missed, you just haven't shot enough. All of this nonsense does not provide too many useful things unless you happen to have that specific caliber for which those wind dots work well. You can true it to some degree, but there's a limit to it, right? All they do is obscure you, prevent you from seeing the splash, basically, right? There is just too much of a mess here. And for precision reticle, if you go BTC, go do what David Tubb did with DTR, that one actually works and makes sense, right? Or do a mill grid. But doing a weird ass combination of this thing, like I said, especially when you're tired, is just asking for trouble. And then on top of it, for me, there are too many solid lines all over the place that just block too much stuff and attract your attention. How can you see anything through this thing, right? Or you're gonna press scope, gets recall to press your scope down so that you can look for splash with the top half of the image. I mean, that's um, it's a little bit of wishful thinking, honestly, right? And then there is all the dots out here, and the periodicity changes. And here there are the mil space dots, and here there are non-linear wind dots of different sizes. And then over here, right at 1 milliradian, they've got some extra ranging thing here. Same thing as here, but a different angle. Why do you need this here? What is this ranging thing gives you that your general milliradian lines do not, right? There's, it's like they were trying to make it look complicated so it's impressive. And I've seen people shoot with these things, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody use more than 10% or 20% of all these different features, right? If it was just this top half, as much as I dislike the whole wind dot nonsense and all this sort of thing, it could have been usable. But different size dots on both sides of the numbers, weirdest features added in. And when you're under stress or tired, you're supposed to keep in mind what all these silly things are. I think it's honestly, I think it's just too much stuff. At its core, it's a milliradian reticle, right? If they just did, kept this vertical thing, kept the horizontal, cleaned up the center a little bit, there's a little bit too much mess, got rid of the wind dots, it would have been a perfectly normal military reticle. All these lead stuff and these weird things, they just muddy the water. I don't have ever seen anybody use this crap. If you just clean this up a little bit, get rid of the bottom portion, it'll be a perfectly reasonable reticle. But as is, it's a little bit of a mess. If you're always shooting in the desert, where there's always dust being kicked up, you can kind of see where the bullets are going. In any less friendly terrain, you see nothing but the weird lines in the reticle, and that's pretty much it. Okay. So, Manitou, there we go. I must admit I ordered the Mark V with T3, and I was a bit nervous when I did. We'll see what I can make of it when I get it. Just so many people that I know are excellent shooters that love it. Military, so the guy who marketed this thing to the military did a very, very good job. He's a good salesman. And the military shooters, a lot of them get trained on this thing. And the fact that we've been fighting in deserty areas for a bit kind of helps. There are good parts to this reticle, but there's a bunch of stuff that, in my opinion, is useless. And trying to use it when you're tired gets tricky. So give it a shot, see what you think. Okay. Chen, a reticle design question. Does the sharp post design draw more attention focus for eyes compared to solid lines? I'm not sure what sharp post design means, so I can't really answer that. If you can elaborate on what exactly you mean, I can try to address it. Okay. Let's see if I have any other reasonable illustrations. Since people brought up Razor HDLHT, let me see if I can pull up that reticle, kind of to show you the other end of a 3 reticle design. Something that usable but inobtrusive. For really long range stuff, you may want something in between. but let me see if I can pull it up on the screen. Okay. All right, this is Vortex's image. It shows dimensions. And let me put that up for a moment. And I'll tell you why this is generally a good design. Okay. And I like this more than the other Vortex Reticles. The tree is not hugely obtrusive, just 10 milliradian for general purpose use. It works fine. For a lot of modern stuff, people like them to be a little bit bigger. There's nothing wrong with it. This is on the somewhat more compact side, but it works well. Illumination is just a cross, so and it can be very dim, so it works well in low light. It's reasonably visible, doesn't drown things out. You get 0.2s, 0.5s, 0.1s. It's an eminently usable reticle for a crossover design. And when you go on low power, the tree sort of disappears, and all you get is kind of like a number 4 reticle. And that's essentially it. This is a nice way of doing this, but even looking at this, despite all the extra illustrations, you notice how when you just glance at the reticle, your eye naturally centers somewhere at the primary aiming point. And when you're fatigued or need to shoot quickly, that's more or less what you want. Okay. Let's see. Thoughts on the Arkhan reticle. I'm looking at the one in the. I have the SH4 Gen 2. Generally, the reticles are thinner than I like, and those bunch of dots in the center is not my favorite thing. The one, it's usable. It's not as much of a mess as the Horus, in my opinion. But low magnification visibility could be better, especially since the scopes I've seen were not illuminated. The 6 o'clock post from German number 2. Yes, the sharp post does make the reticle more visible, but when you have a very thick post, it's hard to do holdover, right? So there is a reason why number 1, number 2 reticles they were used very nicely, but for basically point blank shooting. If you're trying to do holdover with it, the post blocks everything, but it is very, very visible. Monitor the primary arms. I think BPR is one of my favorite tree designs. Of Vortex is EBR27, but we're using now solid as well. So EBR2 I liked somewhat. It needed a little bit work. EBR7 is actually a little bit busier than I like on a horizontal, but it's perfectly usable. The XLR2, which is a further evolution sort of the EBR7 design, is easily my favorite of the Vortex reticles. Drew. For what it is worth, I'm learning this type of reticle, and it is for sure very busy. I like it, but still busy. And then when I hop on a body simple reticle, I look like a pro. Well, okay, I guess that works. Mr. PP Archives. Probably going to swap over to the Delta Hornet G2BR for my Reese AR-15. Yeah, I hope you like it. I designed that reticle. I'm not a huge fan of BDC reticles overall. Delta asked me to put together sort of a general purpose BDC reticle for a 556 carbine, so I designed that one. I have one of these. I gave it. I put it in a rifle that I gave to my nephew, so he's been using it, and it seems to work nicely. Okay. Mr. Manitou, I'm a fan of the primary aiming chevron. Chevrons work quite well. There is there's always some marketing in there. So I've used chevrons quite a bit also on Russian scopes. A lot of the different old SVD Dragunov scopes have them and stuff like that. Chevrons are kind of an interesting thing. It's a fairly visible reticle feature, but it still has a fairly sharp vertex. One of the things we've learned is because it's an asymmetric reticle to some degree, for shooting tiny groups, it's actually not ideal. Dot across hair does better. For shooting plates, well, people, animals, whatever else, the Chevron actually works quite nicely. Primary Arms likes to make a big deal of this Chevron, calling it an infinitely small aiming reticle, and that's a bunch of marketing nonsense. But for shooting, not for shooting groups, for shooting physical targets, it does work very, very nicely. Managed to, if the PR2 was available in a 3.6 to 18, I would have gotten that. No question. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It is mystifying to me that Leopold has not yet offered PR2 reticle in the 3.6 to 18. That would be the first one I would have offered it, and it's that reticle for that scope is a near perfect match, and they don't have it, so I don't know. Chen, since the last discussion about LPVOs, do you see 1.5 or 2x low end scopes will be more popular in the future compared to the one axle PVO, with more people using candid piggybacked RDS? Oh, good question. I don't think they will be more popular than a one power LPVOs. I think we'll see some designs coming up for SPR type use when combined with a piggybacked RDS. I think low power variables are here to stay. And despite what we had in the last discussion, I think the 1x performance is going to remain a big deal. I don't think LPVOs are going anywhere anytime soon. Ian, how sensitive is the position of the eye in the eye box to affecting parallax? Sorry, not a radical question, but you're the expert. So I'm not sure I fully understand the question. If the scope is properly focused, it doesn't matter where your eye in the eye box is, and you should not see any real parallax. Generally, the effect of parallax for most normal shooting, basically when you're not trying to shoot the tiniest groups, is greatly overstated. For most, unless you're shooting really up close where you're really out of focus or really, really far away, if you have reasonable shooting from parallax, should not be a major concern for you. I had a calculator somewhere that calculates a parallax as sort of a function of the focus distance and the objective lens diameter. For comparatively common smallish scopes, parallax should not really be at the top of your priority list. If the eye moves some actual distance, does it affect parallax? Depends on where the target is, right? So if you say you have a low power variable that is set up to be parallax free at 200 yards, and if it really is, you did your eyepiece focusing and all that, when you're looking at the target at 200 yards, it does not matter where you move your eye inside the eye box. There should be no or very, very minimal parallax. Okay. If you are looking at a target that's outside of the focus range of the rifle scope, let's say you are focused at 200 and you're looking at a target at 50 yards, they will be parallax. It will not be big, but they will be parallax, and that's exactly, and you will induce it by moving your eye around. Try to stay centered, should still not be a problem. I hope that answers your question. If not, please clarify. All right, sounds like that answers your question. Good. Always happy to help. All right, I still have coffee, and that's good. All right, guys, what else you got? I'm amazed the hotel internet has been able to keep up for like an hour and a half. It's an interesting day. Let's see. What's a question about Arkhan reticles? While you guys are thinking about the questions, let me see if I can pull up the reticle that I meant. And we'll go from there. So the scope that I have is the SH4 Gen 2. So let's see. So this reticle I like. Let me put that up on the screen. This one is Illuminated Dot. So if you can see this one, this is a perfectly intelligently designed reticle. They are using the same illumination pattern that I did on Optic and March scopes. Perhaps imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, where there's a dot and 4 hashes that are illuminated. When you go to low power, it makes a small dot, and there's a 10 milliradian tree. This is a perfectly competent reticle design. Let's see if what is this? Yeah, that's the same. That's the same. Yeah, that's the same reticle. That's a perfectly competent design, best I can tell. The original reticle that I saw from them that I was less impressed with on low power, it had this array of dots in the center. Okay, I don't see that one. I'm not going to look for it right now, but if I find it, I'll pop it up. Okay. So, okay, Mr. Manitou is abandoning us. Thank you for joining, sir. Really do appreciate it. What is your opinion on Credo 1 to X Trigican Milliradian Reticle? It's not bad. It's not my favorite design in many ways, because what happens is that the center, the segmented circle is not my favorite thing. That it works, it's nicely visible and all that. If you do a milliradian reticle in a 1 to 8 low power variable in the front focal plane, I really prefer some sort of a really compact tree type design, because if you start shooting a little bit further out, you need to have wind holes, and that reticle does not give you wind holes, which I find a little bit odd. It's an etched reticle, why not do it? But if that does not matter to you, it seems to be a perfectly functional reticle, simple enough. Opinions on Bushnell Tactical Elite G3 reticle. So I have not seen it in person yet. I will when I go to SHOT Show. On paper, it looks like a perfectly competent design. PPU Archives. Opinion on the primary arms DMR 308 reticle. Feels way too busy. The Raptor is much more usable. I do not remember which one is the DMR 308 reticle. Let me see if I can pull that up to make sure I am not bullshitting. Where's primary arms? Hold on. Now I look for primary arms and every possible website pops up except for primary arms, of course. All right, primary arms. So I'm not sure which specific scope are you referring to. I'm gonna go look at what they have with their ACSS reticles and see if I can zero in on that. Okay, DMR 308 reticle. I am looking. And I'm not seeing anything called DMR 308 offhand. So, okay, I can sort by reticle name. Okay, I see it. It's called HUD, HUD DMR 308, and it is available in the GLX 4 to 16 scope. Let me see if I can pull that up. Looks like a conventional BDC reticle. I'm not sure what the concern is. Okay, interesting design. So the way a PA website is done, I cannot for some reason magnify this thing. Can I? I cannot. I'm not seeing anything particularly odd with this thing. So GLX 46, so that's the one I'm looking at. Let me show you what I'm looking at, and you tell me if this is the one you dislike. Okay, I don't see an easy way to magnify this thing the way the Primary Arms website works. If the range finding circles on the sides is not my favorite thing in the world. I'll be honest with you. But other than that, it's just a general purpose BDC reticle. So I don't like BDC reticles and scopes like this. I think it's a demonstrably bad idea. And ranging circles don't add anything to it. At least not anything actually useful that I can think of. It does look cool. That's probably one of the reasons it sells. I like the Griffin Mill reticle, but I don't think it's available in this scope as a LPVO reticle and a few others. This is not my favorite reticle design, I'll be honest with you, but people like it. I assume they buy it. Jared, any more reticles coming from Delta that you can share? None that I can share, and I haven't designed anything for them for a while, so I really don't know what else they have coming up. So I'm not very helpful with that. In the movie Predators with Adrian Brody and Alice Braga, that scope and bolt action, is that a real scope with all the electronic buttons? Strange question for the night. Yes, it actually is a real scope. It's an old scope that hasn't been made for a very long time. I think it was the first commercially available digital scope. It was called the Arkhan Digital Hunter. I should be able to find you a picture of it. And if I remember correctly, that was the scope that she had on the trifle. That's what it seemed like to me. I don't see a good picture, but you can look for it. It's called. It was done by Elcan Digital Hunter. Okay. Okay, Roman, thank you for the support. I really do appreciate it. Okay. It's been difficult to find answers to my questions without stupid blogs and their marketing garbage filling up my search. Yeah, absolutely, anytime. Honestly, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this, and it's one of the reasons I started my website. I have a darklordofoptics.com website on a different platform. Part of it was to be independent, potentially from social media. Another part of it is that I put up a small paywall there. And what it does, I don't accept any advertising. There is not too much nonsense. And in order to post, there is a paywall. And what it does to a really good degree, it keeps the idiots out. So it's not a nice thing to say, but it is the truth. That way, I'm able to control the discussion, and also it keeps the volume low enough where I can read everything and I can address everything and make sure that we maintain the quality of the discourse. Nobody likes to pay, and I do appreciate it. But that's what allows me to keep advertising and everything else off of it and keep the discussion civil. So, but I do really appreciate it. Thank you. So let's see. Randall is here. I haven't seen you in a while. What's your view on the MPVO medium power variable optic recently discussed in Recall? Like a 2-30-15 works with 45-degree red dot on the side. To niche, or maybe a good solution for DMR long range rig. So somebody else had brought up that Recall magazine article, and I have not read it, so I simply forgot. When we're done here, I'm gonna go dig it up and use it and read it. The idea of medium power variable optic It's something I've been pushing for nearly a decade, just can't get anybody to make it. And what I really want, and I keep on bringing it up, is a 3 to 15 by 38 rifle scope, so it can be kept compact, give me reasonable magnification, and together with a piggyback to an offset red dot, it's a really, really good sighting setup for an accurate AR-15, something like that. I generally like the idea. I don't know if the guys at Recall had the same thing in mind or not. I'll go read it and see. It does not replace a low power variable. But for a DMR, truly, medium to long range, capable AR-15 and 6 arc or something like that, I think that is a very, very good sighting setup. I think you're better off with a thin BPR meal or R-grid to be just learn the system. It is busy, but I think it's worth mastering. Okay, as long as it works for you. Jared, are you still coming to SHOT Show 2022? And are you planning a particular schedule? Are you looking forward to seeing anything in particular? I am coming to SHOT Show 2022. I booked my hotel. The show's continuing, which is nice. And I am kind of gingerly putting together a schedule. For those of you who are, if you're able to get into SHOT Show, if you guys are interested in meeting somewhere, I was gonna go and try to select a couple of different booths where I was gonna hang out for a little bit longer and see if we want to meet there. Maybe one with conventional scopes, one with thermals, something like that. I'm wearing this T-shirt from a company called Envision. They're here in Boston. I actually went and visited them yesterday. They're good guys. Maybe if you guys want to talk a little bit about thermal, and I really like the way they do thermal rifle scopes, maybe one of the good places to meet would be the Envision booth, and I'll publish it a little bit later on my website to see when it would be a good time to meet. If you guys are coming to SHOT Show, do let me know, and I'm sure we can arrange something. As far as whether I'm looking forward to seeing anything in particular, honestly, I get to see products anyway. So the things that I know about, I can get my hands on anyway, right? I'm really looking forward to seeing people. A lot of people I know are not going to be there this time, but there's still going to be quite a few. And people is what it's all about. The things that I usually end up finding most memorable are the things I do not expect. So I spend quite a lot of time going to the smaller booths because the clever stuff is usually happening there. There are, of the things that I know are coming, I can't really talk about most of them, but I've also already made arrangements to get my hands on most of them, so I don't need SHOT Show for that. It's the stuff I'm not aware of that I really want to see, right? So what am I missing by sitting in my office at home and talking about stuff, right? There's plenty of smaller companies that I don't normally run into. They are going to be at SHOT Show, and I'm going to go look around and see if really there's anything worthwhile there. Okay. Mr. Spice Sweeper, thanks, Ilya, for your insights and knowledge. Good night. All right. Mr. Spice Sweeper, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the good questions. I really do appreciate it. Okay. Where was I? Yeah, Jared, so I hope that answers your SHOT Show question. It's going to be a big show this year. They added some extra space. And they also, at the same time as SHOT Show in Las Vegas, this time is the Safari Club International convention. I've never been to that one. It's usually just after SHOT, and it's usually in Reno somewhere else. This time it's in Las Vegas, also just in a different hotel. And it's going Wednesday through Saturday. SHOT is Tuesday through Friday. So for at least one day, maybe a little bit more, I'm going to go to Safari Club International. I reached out to them, so they gave me my media badge. Otherwise, it's kind of an expensive show to get into. But from what I hear, the taxidermy there is absolutely amazing, and it's worth seeing. So I'm going to definitely go visit. Chen. Vortex Viper has a 3 to 15 model. Do you mean medium power variable should not be much heavier than low power variable? So these scopes are already not much heavier than low power variables. The Vortex Viper 3 to 15 is, I think, 27 or 28 ounces. There are quite a few 1 to 8 low power variables like the PLX from Primary Arms, etc., that weigh the same. Razor Gen 3, I think, is 21 ounces, and the Razor HDL-HT 4.5 to 22 by 50 is more or less the same weight. I think they're within like an ounce of each other. Making a high quality 1X on the low end is one of the things that makes the scope heavy. It's hard to do. You need glass for that. If a company like Vortex, let's say Vortex decided to make me a happy man and make me a 3 to 15 by 38, using the same general design principles as the 4.5 to 22 by 50, they could probably squeeze it into 17, 18 ounces. That's my best guess. So you could actually make it lighter than most front focal plane LPVOs. It can be the same weight together with an offset red dot as a high quality low power variable, but give you much better reach. You give up some speed on one power, right? But it will give you better performance at distance. All right, guys, what else you got? Ooh, that's a good question. Randall, do you think there's a way to push open data sources or standards for these coming more and more digital optic systems that share ranging info, ballistic software, and connected optics? Or are we going to be at the continual mercy of proprietary company systems that will only work in their systems only? SIG is not going to play unless there is some open source alliance created. You want to work on it. Do I want to work in an open source alliance? No, I don't. It sounds like it takes a lot of time, and I don't have any. There are not that many proprietary systems. Applied ballistics is always going to be proprietary. I don't think you're going to do much with that. And frankly, I'm not 100% certain that I hugely care. And I can't quite imagine what would motivate an optics company to switch to this open source thing. So I don't know. Is it an potentially interesting project? Yeah. Is it something that I'm willing to put a lot of time and effort into? Probably not. If I was a little bit less busy, maybe, as is, yeah, it's not likely. Like if I get fired from my day job and I end up doing this for a living, then yeah, it would be a different ballgame. As it is right now, I can't promise something I don't have time for. Drew, about a year ago, I machined an adjustable scope mount that would allow 0, 10, 20, 30 degree sine 80 hours. Tight as it was, still too sloppy. So there is a German company called Aerotech that makes these kind of things. If you have not used it, I'm gonna pull it up on the screen. It works really, really nicely. It's fairly expensive, but probably much cheaper than 80 hours of your time machining things. Let me pull that thing up. There we go. Okay, so the company is called Aerotech, and this is what the thing looks like, and they've got specs in there and all that. They're available, I think, from Optic, somebody like that, and you can dial in from 0 to 70 MOA, but in steps. It's not continuous, it's steps. And it's tight and it holds 0 under recoil and all that sort of stuff. If this is the type of mount you're looking for, Aerotech is worth your time. Okay. Ian, what difficulties come with integrated rangefinders? I always find myself frustrated when ranging targets because I'm trying to stabilize a goofy little device when I have a tripod and rifle here. The problem with integrated rangefinders is there's not a whole lot of them. I am mixed on a rangefinder integrated into an optical system of a rifle scope using the same optics. I generally prefer them, piggybacked or on a side, and there are good solutions coming up. Several reasons. One is that I'm using clip-ons more and more. If you have a nice rifle scope, you put a clip-on in front of it, and the laser goes through a rifle scope, it does not get through the clip-on, right? So I prefer a laser rangefinder to be offset, but it's nice to see the distance displayed as you look through the rifle scope. And a lot of that is coming. A lot of that electro-optic integration is already happening. In many ways, integration of a laser rangefinder with a rifle scope is a very, very natural thing. But the counter argument, of course, is if you're hunting, for example, and you're trying to look at something and figure out the distance to it, you don't necessarily want to be pointing a rifle at it. I am a big proponent of binoculars with integrated laser rangefinders. I've been looking at quite a few, and I really like the concept. Being able to look at stuff and figure range as you are looking for it, right? So one of the things that I do, for example, I oftentimes use a laser rangefinder that talks to my watch, right? So I can lay something and the ballistic table is displayed on my watch. And then when I get behind the gun, I have my holdovers and things like that. So it works quite nicely for me. There are systems coming up. Steiner IFS, they already have it implemented. I haven't fully tested it yet. I'm planning to, where if you can use one of their newer laser rangefinding binoculars, you can laser distance and it will communicate with the rifle scope and display the ballistics as you look through the scope. So it works quite nicely, and you don't end up pointing the gun at things you shouldn't be pointing at, right? So you're not scanning with a gun. But both approaches work. Right. Gentlemen, we are at 1 hour 46 minutes. I said I will cap this at no more than 2 hours. So if you have any other questions, now's the time. Otherwise, I will start to slowly wrap this up. It's what time is it? It's about 11 o'clock where I am. So I do need to occasionally get some sleep. Okay. But Ian, I like your frame about stabilizing a goofy little device when I have a tripod and a rifle here. When I'm hunting, I'm spending a lot more time with a binocular than I am with a gun. But if you are at the range, I totally see when you're looking at different targets that having a laser rangefinder, a core line somehow paired to the rifle scope would be a significant advantage. Like I said, both approaches have their merits. Thank you for joining us. Really do appreciate it. Good questions as always. I like that. That's what kind of keeps me going. All right, gentlemen. I will drink my coffee for a couple more minutes, see if any other questions comes up. Okay, what watch is that? So this is a Garmin Tactics Delta, and that has the applied ballistics engine in it. I don't know if I am going to. I don't know if I'm going to stick with applied ballistics stuff going forward or not, but I like the watch generally, and it works well. On balance, for a rifle with a known load, I'm gonna work out the ballistics table and tape it to the stock, and all I need to know is the distance, and I can sort of figure out the rest of it. I'm not sure I will, in the foreseeable future, rely fully on electronics, but for now, Vortex 5000 binocular together with this watch actually does really good job of doing the laser range finding for me. But new stuff's coming out all the time, so we'll see where that takes me. So Rick, thank you. Good to see you here, sir. Randall, it's been a little while. We should catch up. I don't know if you're coming to SHOT Show. If you are, we should talk. Drew. Dang, autocorrect. Inches should have been bunches. The hell did you say? Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, DLO, and thank you all in the chat. Always inches of great info. I think that's supposed to say bunches of great info. Yes. I hope this is useful. All right, gentlemen. I think we've tapered out with questions, so I am going to wrap this up and go to sleep. Thank you all who had questions, and if there is anything you think of that I have not addressed, please post it in the comments or go to darklordofoptics.com. The full darklordofoptics.com really forwards to darklordofoptics.locals.com. That's sort of my home on the internet. I have multiple websites that I maintain and participate in, but that's the one where I spend most of my time in. So if there is any questions, anything else you can think of, post it in the comments here, go there, and I'll do the best to address whatever questions you may have. And if I don't know, well, then I'll don't know. Right. Thank you all and have a good night. I will do this again Thursday night, 2 weeks from today. Hopefully. I'm going to be traveling again that week, so I'll figure something out. You all have a good night.